Arben Kodra, Dritan Hoxha, and Elira Gashi were names unknown to the world until their shadow empires silently took control of Europe's streets, courts, and boardrooms. Behind closed doors, they orchestrated a network of crime so precise, so invisible, that no law could touch them and no rival could challenge them. Until now, high in Albania's rugged mountains, life seemed frozen in time. Tiny villages clung to steep cliffs, where the wind carried stories of ancient families and long-forgotten rivalries. Outsiders rarely came here, and those who did were quickly reminded that this was a land shaped by survival, not by convenience. For generations, the mountains had been both a refuge and a prison. They protected communities from invaders, but also trapped them in poverty. Schools were scarce, jobs even rarer, and the economy offered little hope. Young men grew up seeing their elders struggle to make ends meet, learning that sometimes the only way to survive was to bend the rules. During the 1990s, after the fall of communism, the fragile country teetered on chaos. Factories closed, banks failed, and entire regions were left without law enforcement. In this vacuum, crime became a tool of survival and power. Families who had once farmed sheep or worked small shops found themselves drawn to the shadows, where risk promised reward. These were not reckless gangs seeking short-term gain. They were groups shaped by hardship, loyalty, and an intimate understanding of their harsh surroundings. They learned to read every sign in the mountains, who was trustworthy, who was not, where danger might come from. Every move mattered, and mistakes could be fatal. From this environment, the first generation of Albania's hidden mafia emerged. They were young, disciplined, and highly observant. Unlike the noisy, violent crime families portrayed in movies, these groups relied on subtlety. They watched, they listened, and they waited. Even as their neighbors struggled with daily life, these men were planning far beyond their villages. They understood that opportunity existed beyond the mountains, in Europe's cities, in ports, and in businesses that seemed legitimate but could hide darker operations. The mountains themselves became schools of strategy. Navigating the terrain taught patience and careful observation. Tracking a target across uneven paths or disappearing into hidden valleys honed skills that would later prove useful in smuggling, evading authorities, and building a network that stretched across borders. Loyalty was everything. Those who betrayed the group vanished without a trace, creating a silent code of fear and respect. Family connections were crucial. Trust was earned through blood, not contracts or promises. By the early 2000s, these men had begun to look outward. The quiet villages that once seemed forgotten were now incubators of ambition. They sent scouts to Europe, observing how other criminal organizations operated, learning from mistakes without taking risks themselves. They saw the power of discreet money flow, the advantage of blending in, and the effectiveness of working in layers. Unlike other mafias, which often relied on visibility and fear, these emerging Albanian groups learned that invisibility could be their greatest weapon. The world outside did not notice them yet. While cities in Europe celebrated economic growth and stability, these groups remained shadows. They were young men with no names in the newspapers, no flashy lifestyle to betray their presence, only a quiet determination and a willingness to do whatever it took to survive and thrive. It was here, among the mountains and the forgotten villages, that the foundation of Europe's most secretive and resilient criminal networks was being built silent, patient, and ready to expand. By the time the first shipments and illicit deals were made, these men were no longer just survivors of poverty. They were architects of a hidden empire born in the mountains, but destined to touch cities thousands of miles away. The expansion of Albania's hidden mafia across Europe was quiet, calculated, and nearly invisible. Unlike traditional criminal organizations, which often relied on public displays of power, violence, or intimidation, these groups chose a different path: silence. They understood that the key to lasting influence was not fear alone, but invisibility. Small teams traveled first, posing as laborers, drivers, or business representatives, observing how European cities functioned. They studied banking systems, logistics, and local law enforcement, learning how to move without leaving a trace. Every step was measured, every interaction calculated. The network grew slowly at first. Italy, with its long coastline and history of organized crime, became the initial target. Albanian operatives blended into local communities, working in construction, restaurants, and car washes. These businesses offered more than just income. They provided a cover for money movement, meeting points for planning, and an explanation for constant travel. In the beginning, neighbors saw them as hard-working immigrants, nothing more. No one suspected that behind the facade of everyday life, an organized and highly efficient criminal network was taking shape. From Italy, the group spread into Germany, the Netherlands, and the United Kingdom. Each city presented unique challenges, from language barriers to law enforcement scrutiny. Yet the Albanians adapted quickly. Instead of rushing in, they observed for months, sometimes years, before establishing operations. Every business, every residence, every transaction was analyzed for potential risk and opportunity. They created layers of intermediaries, ensuring that the leaders remained untouchable. Local authorities occasionally noticed irregularities, but nothing linked directly to the masterminds. A silent strategy was working. One of the most remarkable aspects of this expansion was the use of legal businesses as a front. Construction companies offered a perfect cover for large cash flow, transportation of goods, and hiring trusted personnel. Restaurants and cafes became meeting points disguised as social hubs. Car washes handled money transactions and sometimes acted as storage points for contraband. These businesses created an illusion of legitimacy that confused authorities and communities alike. While traditional mafias might flaunt wealth through flashy cars and expensive properties, Albanian groups kept a low profile, avoiding attention while quietly consolidating power. The network's expansion was not only geographical, but also financial. Money moved seamlessly across borders through a mix of legal and illegal means. Shell companies, fake invoices, and cash transactions ensured that the flow remained hidden. While law enforcement agencies struggled to trace the money, the Albanians were already several steps ahead, always testing new methods and routes. Their adaptability made them a formidable force, and it became clear that this was not a temporary operation, but a long-term strategy designed to establish dominance without confrontation. By the mid-2000s, the Albanian Mafia had established a presence in almost every major European city. Yet, paradoxically, their success remained largely invisible. They were not the stereotypical gangsters of movies or news reports. They did not provoke chaos in public spaces, and they rarely attracted media attention. Their empire was built on patience, intelligence, and the ability to remain unseen. What Europe perceived as ordinary businesses, hard-working immigrants, or quiet neighborhoods often concealed a sophisticated criminal network that spanned the continent. As authorities focused on high-profile arrests and violent gangs, the Albanians continued to expand silently, moving goods, money, and influence across borders. Their power lay not in fear, but in stealth, in the ability to operate under the radar while building an empire that was resilient, adaptable, and almost impossible to trace. By the time most European cities realized the scale of the threat, the network was already deeply rooted, proving that sometimes the most dangerous power is the one that remains hidden in plain sight. The true rise of Albania's hidden mafia came through control of one of Europe's most lucrative markets, cocaine. Unlike traditional mafias that manufactured drugs themselves, these groups understood the advantage of specialization. They did not need to produce. They mastered the art of transport, logistics, and distribution. Their strategy was simple yet brilliant. Move the product efficiently, avoid unnecessary conflict, and ensure that profits reached the top without leaving traces. While other criminal organizations relied on overt intimidation or local violence, the Albanians developed a system that was fast, discreet, and highly profitable. The routes they controlled stretched across continents. Cocaine shipments from South America would arrive at major European ports, often disguised as legal cargo. Containers labeled as fruit, textiles, or machinery hid thousands of kilograms of narcotics. The Albanian groups had experts in inspection avoidance, bribery, and logistics, ensuring that shipments passed through customs with minimal risk. Once the drugs arrived, a network of warehouses, rental trucks, and seemingly ordinary vehicles moved them across borders. The operation was precise, almost mechanical, with every step pre-planned to avoid detection. Unlike other crime organizations, street-level distribution was not their priority. They focused on moving bulk shipments from one country to another, leaving the smaller transactions to local partners. This strategy reduced exposure and minimized the risk of arrest. Street dealers were replaceable, but the masterminds, the planners, the transporters, the coordinators remained untouchable. Their invisibility was their shield, and they used it with unmatched efficiency. The system relied heavily on trust and loyalty. Those involved in handling shipments were carefully selected, often family members or individuals from the same villages in Albania. Outsiders were rarely allowed into the inner circle. Any betrayal or carelessness was met with swift consequences, creating a silent but strict code of enforcement. Those who violated trust vanished without a trace, sending a chilling message that loyalty was non-negotiable. This method of control ensured that the network remained tight-knit and reliable, even as it expanded across multiple countries. Technology also became a tool of efficiency. Unlike older mafias that relied on face-to-face meetings or telephone calls, Albanian operatives used encrypted communication, coded language, and dead drops. Messages passed through layers of intermediaries, so that no single person could reveal the entire operation. Even if law enforcement intercepted a single link, the broader network remained protected. Every shipment had backup plans, alternative routes, and contingency teams ready to act at a moment's notice. The financial aspect was equally sophisticated. Profits from cocaine were quickly laundered through legal businesses, real estate, and shell companies. Money moved across borders in ways that appeared legitimate, making it nearly impossible to trace the flow from street-level distribution back to the Albanian leaders. Banks struggled to detect patterns, while the mafia continued to expand its reach. Their wealth allowed them to invest in new ventures, bribe officials when necessary, and maintain a lifestyle that remained discreet yet powerful. By the late 2000s, Albania's mafia had become synonymous with the cocaine trade in Europe. They were efficient, invisible, and almost untouchable. Their success was not built on reckless violence, but on intelligence, planning, and discipline. While law enforcement agencies focused on intercepting shipments and arresting street-level criminals, the true architects of the empire remained hidden, quietly overseeing a network that stretched from the mountains of Albania to the ports and cities of Europe. Their dominance was a testament to the power of precision, patience, and secrecy, proving that control of the supply chain was far more dangerous than any public display of force. Trust was the foundation of Albania's hidden mafia, but even the strongest alliances could be tested by greed and ambition. Family ties and village loyalty were more than traditions. They were the glue that held the network together. Members shared not only blood, but a common understanding of survival, secrecy, and strategy. From a young age, many were taught that betrayal was the gravest offense, punishable by disappearance or worse. Yet, as the organization grew richer and more powerful, cracks began to appear in this carefully constructed code of loyalty. The inner circle of the mafia was small but influential. These were the planners, the transport coordinators, and the enforcers who ensured that operations ran smoothly across multiple countries. They met rarely, often using intermediaries and safe houses to communicate. Each member knew their role and understood that mistakes could cost lives. However, success brought temptation. One member, trusted for years, quietly began sharing shipment information with rival groups. The betrayal was subtle at first: delays in deliveries, miscommunication, and misplaced cargo, but the inner leadership sensed something was wrong. What followed was swift and silent. No confrontations, no public scenes, only calculated actions that erased any evidence of the betrayal. Homes were emptied, personal belongings vanished, and in some cases, entire families disappeared from their villages. Rumors spread through the network, instilling fear without a single act of violence being publicly visible. The message was clear: loyalty was absolute, and disloyalty would be met with consequences so complete that even memories of the person could fade. The inner circle reinforced its grip, ensuring that the betrayal did not destabilize the larger organization. This period of internal turbulence also revealed the Mafia's strength. While rivals expected chaos, the organization adapted quickly. New members were brought in carefully, always from trusted communities, and every operation was reassessed for vulnerability. The leadership became even more secretive, introducing additional layers of intermediaries and double-checking routes for shipments. The betrayal had exposed a weakness, but it also strengthened the network, demonstrating that the group could survive internal conflict as effectively as external threats. At the same time, the fear of betrayal influenced the behavior of everyone involved. Members learned to question even the most trusted allies, to monitor shipments and communications closely, and to anticipate moves by both internal and external actors. The consequences extended beyond the immediate network. Rival groups, law enforcement agencies, and even local communities observed the disappearances and disruptions, unsure of what had happened. The inner workings of the Mafia remained a mystery, even to those who thought they had penetrated it. Through it all, the Albanian Mafia maintained its outward appearance of invisibility and control. While whispers of betrayal circulated quietly among insiders, the organization continued its expansion across Europe, moving shipments, laundering money, and solidifying its power. The lesson was clear. In this hidden world, loyalty was both the strongest weapon and the most fragile element. A single act of betrayal could ripple through the network, but it could also serve as a catalyst for even greater discipline and strength, ensuring the survival of the empire for years to come. By the time European authorities began to notice the growing influence of Albania's mafia, the organization had already perfected the art of invisibility. Unlike older crime families that flaunted wealth through flashy cars, luxury yachts, or ostentatious displays of violence, the Albanian networks operated in plain sight while remaining untouchable. Leaders rarely appeared in public, never used personal phones, and left no traceable financial records. Orders were passed through layers of intermediaries, ensuring that even if one member were caught, they could reveal nothing of significance. The inner circle became almost like ghosts, moving and acting without ever being seen. The genius of this invisibility lay in discipline. No shipment was handled by a single person from start to finish. Packages changed hands multiple times, often crossing borders in ways that appeared entirely legal. Trucks carrying legitimate goods were repurposed to move contraband, while warehouses rented under false identities acted as temporary storage. Employees at front businesses often believed they were performing normal work tasks, unaware of the illicit operations happening behind closed doors. Even when authorities raided facilities, they found evidence of criminal activity but could not connect it to the masterminds. Each operation was designed to protect the identities of those at the top, creating a barrier between the law and the true architects of the empire. Technology played a critical role in maintaining this untouchable image. Encrypted communications, coded language, and disposable devices ensured that conversations could not be intercepted. Meetings rarely occurred in person, and when they did, locations were rotated constantly and often involved decoys to confuse any observers. Leaders avoided banks whenever possible, instead relying on layers of intermediaries and legal businesses to launder money. Even within the organization, knowledge was compartmentalized. Few individuals had a complete understanding of operations, which meant that no one could compromise the entire network. The Albanians also mastered timing. Shipments, meetings, and financial transfers were scheduled carefully to minimize risk. Contingency plans were in place for every eventuality, from border inspections to law enforcement surveillance. If one route was compromised, alternative methods were immediately activated, allowing operations to continue without interruption. This constant adaptation reinforced the perception of invincibility. To outsiders, it appeared as if the Mafia were always one step ahead, untouchable and invisible. Beyond logistics, the leaders cultivated a culture of secrecy and discipline within their network. Members understood that failure to follow protocols could jeopardize everyone. Those who disobeyed orders or drew attention were quickly removed, sometimes disappearing without explanation. The fear of consequences ensured compliance, while loyalty was constantly tested and reinforced. Even as the organization expanded across Europe, this strict internal discipline maintained stability and minimized exposure. By combining strategic invisibility, advanced technology, meticulous planning, and a culture of obedience, the Albanian Mafia created an image of untouchable power. Authorities could seize shipments, arrest minor members, and disrupt small operations. But the true leaders remained beyond reach. Their success was not built on violent intimidation or public spectacle, but on patience, precision, and a relentless commitment to secrecy. As European police forces scrambled to understand the scope of their operations, the Albanian bosses watched silently from the shadows, untouchable, untraceable, and always several steps ahead. The untouchable image was more than reputation. It was the foundation of their empire. The enormous profits generated by Albania's hidden mafia required careful handling, and the organization quickly became skilled at turning illegal wealth into seemingly legitimate assets. The process of laundering money was not a side activity. It was a critical part of their operation. Drug shipments, smuggling operations, and other criminal ventures produced vast amounts of cash that could not simply be stored in homes or hidden away. To secure their power and avoid drawing attention, the Mafia invested in businesses, real estate, and financial instruments across Europe. Every euro spent had to appear legal, creating a complex web of transactions that masked the true source of the funds. Construction projects became one of the primary methods of laundering money. Entire neighborhoods in several cities were quietly purchased, renovated, or built from scratch, using funds that had originated from criminal activity. By investing in legal projects that employed local workers, the Mafia created a dual benefit. Not only was the money disguised as legitimate investment, but it also generated goodwill within communities. Residents who relied on these projects for employment had little reason to question the origins of the funding. In some cases, entire streets of luxury apartments or commercial buildings were quietly controlled by Mafia-linked companies, blending seamlessly into the urban landscape. Hotels, restaurants, and cafes provided additional avenues for laundering money. The constant flow of cash in these businesses made it easy to mix legal and illegal funds. High-end restaurants offered a perfect cover where expensive meals and wine sales could justify large sums of money. Hotels allowed for transactions under the guise of bookings and services. Even car washes or small retail stores played a role, handling daily cash flow that could be declared as normal business income while concealing illicit profits. This network of businesses ensured that large amounts of money could move without raising suspicion from banks or authorities. Banks themselves became part of the strategy. The Mafia used multiple accounts, shell companies, and international transfers to move money across borders. Each transaction was structured to appear legitimate, often tied to invoices, business contracts, or real estate deals. Complex layering made tracing the origins nearly impossible, even for experienced investigators. By the time authorities reviewed bank statements or financial reports, the money had often moved several times, making the trail cold. The financial influence of the Albanian Mafia extended beyond their own operations. By controlling businesses and investing in neighborhoods, they gained indirect influence over local economies. Jobs depended on their investments, and some communities quietly benefited from the improvements they funded. This created a paradoxical situation. While authorities sought to dismantle their network, the removal of mafia-controlled assets could potentially harm local economies. It blurred the line between criminal activity and legitimate economic development, making intervention more complicated. The organization's financial strategy also supported its expansion and resilience. Legalized profits funded new smuggling routes, bribed officials when necessary, and allowed for the purchase of properties in key European cities. Investments in real estate and businesses became not only a way to launder money, but also a method of consolidating power, creating influence, and building a legacy. Through these methods, the Albanian Mafia turned crime into a form of enterprise, operating with precision and long-term vision. By blending illicit profits with legitimate investments, the Albanian Mafia created a system where their wealth appeared lawful, their influence invisible, and their power untouchable. They did not just survive in Europe, they became a silent force shaping economies, neighborhoods, and industries. Their ability to make dirty money look clean was a testament to strategy, patience, and discipline, cementing their place as one of the most sophisticated criminal networks on the continent. In response to the growing awareness of Albania's hidden mafia, European authorities launched one of the most ambitious operations in recent history. Task forces spanning multiple countries coordinated raids on warehouses, businesses, and residences linked to the network. Headlines celebrated these arrests as a major victory against organized crime, portraying the operation as a decisive blow to an otherwise untouchable empire. Dozens of mid-level operatives were taken into custody, shipments were seized, and banks scrutinized. At first glance, it seemed as though the Albanian network had finally been cornered. However, beneath the surface, the operation revealed the resilience of the organization. While the arrests disrupted minor operations and created temporary setbacks, the true leaders remained untouched. Their meticulous strategies ensured that orders could continue to flow through alternative intermediaries, allowing the network to adapt almost immediately. The empire's structure, built on layers of secrecy and compartmentalization, meant that no single arrest could cripple the organization. Those taken into custody often had minimal knowledge of the broader operation, leaving law enforcement without critical information on the inner circle or long-term plans. The aftermath of the raids also exposed the limitations of conventional law enforcement approaches. While authorities focused on visible assets, warehouses, and shipments, the mafia had already diversified their operations. Money and goods had been moved, businesses were controlled through proxies, and new routes were quietly established. By the time investigators traced one trail, another had already been created. The arrests created a temporary disruption, but did not impact the long-term strategic planning of the organization. In fact, the operation served as a test for the mafia, highlighting vulnerabilities and prompting even tighter internal security measures. The network's ability to regenerate was almost instantaneous. New faces replaced those arrested, often individuals who had been trained for years within the organization, but had remained hidden from public scrutiny. These replacements understood the importance of secrecy, discretion, and precision. They stepped into roles without attracting attention, seamlessly continuing operations across Europe. The leadership, always careful to remain invisible, continued directing shipments, managing finances, and maintaining control from behind multiple layers of intermediaries. What law enforcement saw as a setback was, in reality, a minor disruption within a much larger and highly adaptive system. At the same time, the public perception of victory created a dangerous illusion. Media reports hailed the raids as the end of Albania's criminal influence, generating confidence in law enforcement efforts. Meanwhile, the true leaders worked quietly, observing the responses of authorities, adjusting routes, and reinforcing security. This gap between perception and reality highlighted the sophistication of the Mafia's strategy. They understood that appearing vulnerable could be used against their opponents, and they allowed minor setbacks to reinforce their invisibility. By the end of the operation, it became clear that the raids had cut branches, but not uprooted the tree. The network remained intact, profitable, and adaptive. Every seizure, arrest, and publicized victory only confirmed one truth: the Albanian Mafia's power was not dependent on individuals visible to the outside world, but on the strength of its structure, discipline, and secrecy. While Europe celebrated what seemed like a significant achievement, the real empire continued to operate quietly, resilient, and untouchable, proving that conventional measures could disrupt, but never fully defeat a network built to survive under the radar. Today, the Albanian Mafia stands as one of Europe's most elusive and powerful criminal networks. Unlike traditional crime families that relied on fear, intimidation, or public displays of strength, these groups have mastered the art of silent control. Their influence stretches across cities, borders, and industries, yet their leaders remain largely unknown to the public. They do not seek headlines or notoriety. Their power comes from remaining unseen, operating in shadows, while controlling vast amounts of wealth, territory, and influence. In many ways, this makes them more dangerous than visible gangs, because law enforcement and rival organizations struggle to understand or confront an enemy they cannot locate. The structure of the organization is built around careful planning, loyalty, and compartmentalization. Every member knows their role, and knowledge is distributed selectively so that no single person can compromise the network. Shipments, finances, and operations are managed through intermediaries and proxies, creating layers of separation between the leaders and any potential evidence. This system of invisibility allows the Mafia to continue expanding even when raids, arrests, or rival attacks occur. The organization adapts quickly, often replacing personnel with trained operatives who can maintain continuity without attracting attention. Control extends far beyond criminal operations. Money laundered through legal businesses, real estate, and investments provides both profit and influence. Entire neighborhoods, companies, and even small industries are quietly affected by their presence. Jobs, contracts, and economic activity are tied to their investments, which creates a subtle but powerful form of control over communities. Local authorities often face a dilemma. Disrupting these operations could destabilize local economies or public services that rely indirectly on Mafia investments. This ability to manipulate both legal and illegal systems highlights the sophistication of the network, as well as its ability to maintain a facade of legitimacy. Adaptation and innovation are also key to their longevity. The Albanian Mafia constantly studies law enforcement techniques, technological advances, and market trends, using this knowledge to refine their operations. Routes for smuggling, laundering methods, and business strategies are updated regularly, ensuring that the network remains ahead of detection. While other criminal groups may be disrupted by visible arrests or confiscation of assets, the Albanians have built resilience into every aspect of their organization. Setbacks are temporary, and the empire continues to expand quietly, often stronger after each challenge. Perhaps the most remarkable aspect of their power is psychological. The mere knowledge that leaders are invisible, that betrayal can be punished without trace, and that the network operates beyond conventional law enforcement creates fear and caution among rivals, insiders, and authorities alike. This fear reinforces compliance, secrecy, and loyalty, making the organization self-sustaining. Communities, law enforcement agencies, and even competing criminal groups find themselves operating in a world subtly controlled by forces they cannot see. In the end, the Albanian Mafia demonstrates that power in the modern era does not always come from violence or intimidation. It comes from strategy, patience, and control over both legal and illegal systems. Their empire is global, sophisticated, and resilient, and their leaders remain hidden while their influence is everywhere. As Europe continues to search for criminals it can identify, the true godfathers of this hidden world move freely among ordinary people, silently shaping economies, operations, and power. Their dominance is not loud. It is invisible, adaptive, and enduring, a testament to the idea that the most dangerous power is the one no one can see coming.